Hey there everyone, Ramesh here, back again with another video. In this video I'm going to show you how to write an integration test for data access layer or the repository layer using test containers. Well, in one of the previous video I have shown how to write an integration test for the REST API using test containers. Okay, and this video is basically continuation of this video, that is Spring Boot application integration testing using test containers, right? That's why I highly suggest you to watch this video first, because in this video I have explained everything, like what is the problem with integration test that we execute with respect to the local MySQL database, and what is the solution for that. Basically test container is the solution for that, and I have shown like how to integrate test containers in a Spring Boot application and how to execute integration test with respect to MySQL database which is deployed in a Docker container using test containers. Alright, I have explained basically everything about test containers in this video, so I highly suggest you to watch this video first, that is Spring Boot application integration testing using test containers, and then you can come back to this video, that is integration testing for data access layer or the repository layer using test containers. Alright, great. Let's head over to the IntelliJ IDEA, and in previous video I have created Spring Boot test containers demo project to showcase how to write integration test using test containers, right? Well, let me quickly summarize. We have created a JP entity, that is student JP entity, and then we have created a student repository, and then we have created a couple of REST APIs for student resource, and then we have created an integration test for get all students REST API. All right, and first we have seen like how to run this integration test case with local MySQL database, and we understood what is the problem with the local MySQL database. That is like this integration test is depends on the MySQL database, right? We have to first install the MySQL database, then only we can able to run the integration test, right? So this is the problem, and test containers we have used as a solution. All right, so basically we have created one abstract container based test class, and we have added MySQL container from the test containers. So this MySQL container, basically it will pull the Docker image, that is MySQL latest Docker image from the Docker hub, and it will deploy in a Docker container, and then we can run our integration test cases with respect to the MySQL database that is deployed in a Docker container. We don't have to install MySQL server or the database in our local machine. So in this way we have used test containers as a solution. If we use the test containers, then we don't have to install the MySQL database or any other external services that integration test depends on, right? If we have a Docker, then we can simply use test containers to test or to execute integration test on the external services, for example database which is deployed in a Docker container. Well, now what we're going to do is we're going to write integration test for data access layer or the repository layer, and then we'll see how to execute integration test with respect to the database, that is MySQL database which is deployed in a Docker container using test containers. Well, I am going to open student repository over here, and in order to create an integration test for this student repository, I will just select it and click on generate over here, and then click on test, and by default IntelliJ IDEA will give class name as student repository test. Okay, so let's keep this class name as it is, it makes sense, and yeah, that's it, and go ahead and click on OK. Now in order to test the repository layer, we're gonna use annotation called @data_jpa_test annotation. So let's go and let's annotate this class with @data_jpa_test annotation. Okay, so Spring Boot basically provides this annotation to test only the repository layer components. Okay, so this annotation is awesome because this annotation only load the repository layer components. It don't load the service layer or the controller layer components. This is awesome, right? And this annotation basically internally provides in-memory database for testing purpose. Okay, but in our case we are going to use MySQL database, right, for integration testing. If you want to write the unit test, then you can go ahead and use in-memory database. But if you want to If you want to write the integration test cases, then you have to use the real database, for example MySQL database or any other relational database. Okay, don't use in-memory database for integration testing, because you are testing basically the integration of different parts, in this case the repository layer and the database. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to use one more annotation to disable the in-memory database support. As I mentioned, at data JPA test annotation, it internally provides in-memory database support, but we are not going to use in-memory database. We are going to use MySQL database, right? For that, what we're going to do is we're going to disable in-memory database support. In order to do that, we're going to use a annotation called auto configure test database, and it has a property called replace, and then again call auto configure test database, and then simply call replace and then none. Okay, so this annotation with this attribute will basically disable the in-memory database support. So once we disable the in-memory database support, then it will by default take whatever the database we have configured in the application.properties file. If we open the application.properties file, we have configured MySQL database details, right? Now our repository will pick up the MySQL database details and it will connect to the MySQL database. Alright, now we are good to write the integration test cases. So within a class, let's go ahead and let's auto wire student repository, because we are going to test the student repository methods, right? For that we need to auto wire this. And now let's go ahead and let's create a JUnit test case, public void, and again we are going to follow given when then format. So this is given, so we are going to basically write a JUnit test case for save student operation. Okay, given student object when save method called, and save method returns what it returns. Basically it returns saved student object, right? Yep. So this is the basically JUnit test case naming convention that I follow. So this is basically called BDD style, behavior driven development. Okay, given when then, in case of given we specify the free condition or the setup, and save when save. So save is basically a method that we are going to test, and save method basically return the saved student object. Okay, now let's divide this JUnit test case into three parts. Given is nothing but your setup or the free condition that we are going to do before doing the actual testing. This is the free condition. Alright, and next comes when section. So in when section we do the action or the actual testing. Okay, and then in a then section we verify basically the output. Okay, sounds good. Whatever the result we get from the when section, that we verify in the then section. Okay, great. Now let's head over to the given section over here, and here we are going to simply create one student object. We first need to create the student object, and then only we can able to save it, right? So go ahead and create the student object here, student, and let's use a build on pattern here to build the student object. First name, let's go and let's use first name as Ramesh. You can use your name, and then last name. All right, and again we have an email. Alright, and let's go and let's call the build method to build the object. Alright, so this is basically a prerequisite. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to event section over here, and we simply call student repository and its save method to save the student object. Let's pass student object, and this save method basically returns an entity, okay, that is student in our case. Let's say saved student. Okay, and now we got a result from this save method. We want to verify this one, right? In order to verify that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use asserts class from the Jupyter.api package, and then we're going to call here assert equals, we are going to verify basically the primary key, okay, whether the primary key is generated for this or not. In order to do that, what we're going to do is assert not null. Okay, we're going to verify assert not null, and here what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply call save student and then get ID. Well, once the student object is saved in a database, then the primary key will be assigned to this student object, right? And that is what we are verifying here. And you can also add one more assert statement saying that assert not null saved student. You can also make sure that like this object, whatever the object that save method returns, is not null. Okay, now let's go and let's annotate this method with add test annotation so that the JUnit framework can recognize this method as a JUnit test case. Okay, all right, now what else? Okay, we are pretty much developed this integration test for save method. Now if we run this JUnit test case, then it will connect to the MySQL database that we have installed locally, right? So let's go and let's run the JUnit test case, but before that make sure that your MySQL server is up and running and you have created a database, okay, that is demo database. Okay, so these are the steps we have seen in the previous video. Now let's go and let's run the integration test case and let's see how this works. And before that, here, look at here, this integration test is not using test containers. Okay, this is the plain integration test that we have written with respect to the MySQL database, which is there in a local machine. Okay, we are not integrated test containers with this test cases yet. All right, now I'm going to run this integration test case, and later on we'll add the test containers. Now this will execute very fast because we are not using test containers. Alright, it means that the integration test case we have written is working as expected, and also you can see the Hibernate generated SQL query behind the scene to insert the student object. Alright, it means that this integration test is working as expected with respect to the MySQL database. Now the problem with this integration test is that this integration test depends on the MySQL database that we have installed in a local machine. Okay, so ideally our test should not be dependent on any external service, right? In order to solve this issue, we can use test containers. All right, so basically test containers provides a Docker container so that we can simply pull the Docker image from the Docker hub, and then we can deploy in a Docker container. All right, well, in previous video I have explained in detail like what is the problem with the current integration test cases and how the test container solves the problem. Okay, I have explained in detail, so you can go ahead and check out that video. Now we are good to integrate test containers. Okay, so in order to integrate test containers, it's pretty simple. We have already created abstract class with all the code. Okay, we have basically created MySQL containers instance, that is singleton instance, and whatever the integration test classes we create, we simply extend this class and we can able to get this container. All right, in our case, if you can open this integration test we have developed in the previous video, we have just extended this abstract container base test class. That's it, and this will provide test containers support, like it will it will create the MySQL container instance here, and it will pull this MySQL latest Docker image from the Docker hub, and test containers will deploy this Docker image in a Docker container, and then the integration test will execute with respect to this MySQL which is there in a Docker container, right? So in order to use this test containers in integration test cases, we simply need to extend this class. That's it, extends abstract container base test. All right, that's it. We don't have to write much code here because we have already done the setup in previous video, right? Now what we can do is we can run the integration test case and we'll see how this integration test will work with respect to the MySQL database which is deployed in a Docker container. Before running the integration test, make sure that you have your Docker basically running in your machine. Well, I have already started the Docker, and you can see Docker desktop is running in my machine. So make sure that in your case your Docker desktop is running in your machine, otherwise this test will fail. Okay, now let me run the integration test case and let's see how this works. Look at here, MySQL latest Docker image is getting pulled from the Docker hub and it is getting deployed in a Docker container. Alright, so test containers will do these things for us. And there we go, the integration test is successfully passed. It means that we have written an integration test case for this one method, that is a repository method, and we have successfully tested this integration test with respect to the MySQL database, which is deployed in a Docker container. Okay, and here I written only one integration test, but you can go ahead and write few more integration tests for student repository methods. For example, you can write integration test for find by id method, find all method, delete method, and all those stuff, right? For example, you can simply copy this JUnit test case and simply change it. For example, let's say you are going to write the integration test for find by id method. Okay, so find by id method expect basically id, right? So this is given as a student id. When find by id, then it returns a saved student object. And here within a body section, you don't have to change much, you just need to change this given section. So you have to first save the student object into a database, then only you can able to get that student from by find by id method, right? Let's call find by id method and just pass student dot get id, and this will basically return the student object. And this student object you can verify in a assert statement by using the assert statements. Alright, so this student is already used, so let me say something like student db, because we are getting from the student db. And find by id method returns optional, so I am going to call here get method. Alright, and if you can run this integration test, it should work. Alright, you can go ahead and write an integration test for all other repository methods. For example, find all, delete, delete by id. Okay, it's pretty simple. You can go ahead and report these integration test cases, right? So let's see how this works. And there we go. And there we go. Test passed. It means that the integration test we have written for find by id method is working as expected. Okay. So this is how basically we write the integration test for data access layer or the repository layer using test containers. Okay, so test containers is an awesome Java library, guys. It provides basically it allows us to use Docker containers in JUnit test cases itself, so that we don't have to depend on the external services. Alright, so these are the few new things I am going to teach you going forward. Alright, so make sure that you subscribe to my YouTube channel, so whenever I will publish such videos, you will get notified. Thanks for watching. I hope this video you will find it useful. Thanks for watching. I will see you in next video.